The day I found a semi parked across my driveway, blocking my truck in and squinting at me like it owned the place, I thought it was one of those small-town pranks that get talked about for a week and then die. I unlocked the gate, walked up to the cab, and there was nobody, just a chain looped through the bumper and a clipboard with smeared ink. I hooked my thumb through the chain and said out loud, "Not today," like that helped anything, and then I locked the gate again. That's how it started. 3 sentences, 1 locked chain, and everyone around us suddenly had an opinion. My name is Sam Hart, and I've lived on the ridge where the pavement thins and the county map turns into fields for almost 15 years. We called it Fox Run until some developer changed it to Fox Run Heights on a glossy sign. But really, it's just a row of stubborn houses marching into farmland, the kind of place people buy when they want quiet and end up with neighbors. The homeowners association was small and loud, mostly one woman with a habit for meetings and a taste for rulebooks. Her name was Marla Hargrove, and she treated the covenants like gospel and the neighborhood like her congregation. If you ever want to see how rules look when someone loves the paper more than the people, follow her around a Saturday. That morning, when Marla showed up, heels on gravel, lipstick sharpened, a stack of printed violation notices like armor, there were already 3 neighbors peering over their fences, phones out like witnesses to the opening act. Marla took one look at the semi, her mouth folded the way it does when she's about to correct someone's grammar, and she said, "You can't just lock your gate on common property, Mr. Hart." I let the silence do the answering for me. Silence is underrated. It gives people the chance to reveal themselves. "You see that chain?" I said eventually, because I'm not good at dramatic pauses. "It's through my padlock. It's on my land. If you want it moved, find the owner. Don't use me as your footstool." She smiled like a woman who believes the rulebook will bend to her will, and those 2 board members behind her, one elderly man in a faded polo, the other a woman who nodded like a bobblehead, shifted as if they were reading the same script. They'd all rehearsed this. What they hadn't rehearsed was the truck. People love a spectacle. The semi became ours, though nobody claimed it. Kids stopped on their bikes to take pictures, which in my town is basically free advertising for drama, and someone tied a cheap set of fairy lights around the grill because Halloween lights make everything feel like community theater. Marla tried to stage a citation, obstruction of ingress and egress, and other legal-sounding words, but when the county sheriff stopped by, Deputy Morales squinted at the clipboard and said, "Private property dispute. We need an owner's claim before we get involved." He left with a polite nod, which in the end is what a lot of justice looks like, polite and slow. That is when the game turned. Marla realized the truck could be used as theater. She called a special HOA meeting that evening and tried to make it look like a civic duty, like she was the only one standing between order and chaos. She read aloud from covenants that convened at 2 in the morning in a voice that made my coffee taste bitter, but nobody could produce the paperwork tying the semi to any of us. I kept my mouth shut, but I was watching the people you think you know act in a way that lets you see their seams. The first tow came with thumping music and a clipboard, an outfit that takes cash and good posture. They looked at the truck, looked at my lock, and left. No owner. The second tow showed up with a man who wore confidence like a jacket and an impatience I recognized. He tested the chain, measured the padlock with eyes that were always trying to find the rule. He touched the lock, and I put my hand on his wrist, not to be dramatic, just to anchor myself. "Not on my watch," I said. He pulled back like I'd surprised him with a snake. People forget how a simple touch can change the shape of an argument. Night fell, and the rig stayed. Later, a group at the edge of the lane, 2 men and a tall kid who looked like he wanted to be taller, tried to cut the chain. They had bolt cutters and cheap bravado. I stood on my porch with a flashlight, knees tired, and watched as one of them clumsily tried to snip the chain and then swore when the metal didn't give. Someone flicked a headlight. Screams, a scuffle, the kind of clumsy courage that collapses when a police cruiser's red and blue confronts it. The deputy drove by, and the men dispersed. The kid's teeth chattered. The encounter left a bruise in the neighborhood, a bruise you can feel days later in coffee conversations. What changed everything wasn't a scuffle or a citation. It was the rear door a neighbor discovered propped open by the wind, her curiosity more efficient than our community's combined efforts at order. Inside the trailer were pallets and crates, interrupted manifests, invoices with addresses that peeled like old labels, and a stack of ledger pages folded into a binder. On the top sheet, in a hurried hand and a name I recognized because I'd seen it on emails and HOA flyers and petitions, was Marla Hargrove. There it was, stamped in ink that refused to be performative, a link between the truck and the woman who'd been telling us where the line between order and chaos was supposed to be. I photographed everything. I copied numbers and serials, and the way the paper cut the light when I held it under my porch lamp. I called Deputy Morales, and I asked for someone who could say the words chain of custody without sounding like it belonged in a movie. They came, quietly, and with the kind of methodical patience that's different from our town's theatrics. There were ledgers that suggested payments to companies that didn't exist, invoices for cleanups never performed, and a chain of small, secretive deals that looked like someone treating a public office like a private bank account. When the investigators started to walk the houses, the neighbors who had been taking pictures suddenly grew cautious. People who'd laughed at the lights and the novelty of a semi in the yard now asked for copies of the photos and the dates. Some of Marla's allies, people who had enjoyed her rulings when they favored them, quietly asked to be excluded from future statements. Power is a social thing. It requires an audience, and when the audience thins, the power gets nervous. Marla called a meeting to reclaim the narrative. She stood at the podium, voice polished, hands steady. "This has been a smear," she said, "a character assassination." Her words landed like flat stones. I stood up because there's a point where silence starts leaning into cowardice. I put the copies of the manifests on the table, the photos on my phone open to the timestamps, and I looked at her. "You told us to follow the rules," I said. "So I followed the one that matters, evidence." You could hear a pin drop. The board members shuffled, their loyalties leaking out in real time. What followed wasn't fireworks. It was a dismantling. Deputies read a warrant. Detectives explained terms like misappropriation and paper trail in ways that made Marla's smile shrink. She didn't go quietly. No one who has rehearsed a role for years collapses without a scene, but the room shifted, and people who had been on her side began to ask the questions she'd always answered for them. The semi was tagged. The county ordered it impounded. The parade of spectator opinions that had made the truck an attraction turned into a procession of subpoenas and statements. There was a moment afterward standing at my gate. The night quiet, the fairy lights snuffed out because someone finally had common sense that I felt something complex, not triumph, not even relief at first, but the weight of a neighborhood that had to learn how to be itself again. You might expect me to say I celebrated. I didn't. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the impound truck take the semi away, smaller somehow in distance, its purpose stripped to metal and paper. Marla's voice faded into the background like a radio getting turned down. She packed up her certificates, and, for a while, the meetings she once dominated were postponed or canceled. That absence was its own loudness. A neighborhood is not fixed by the absence of one person, even one who thinks rules equal righteousness. In the weeks after, there were meetings, real ones, about transparency, about shared responsibilities, about how a small community can avoid making its governance a private theater. People who had never spoken up before began asking for minutes and receipts. Small changes, but honest ones. We added a clause to require publicized contracts and a second signatory for expenditures over a certain amount. It was bureaucratic and boring and exactly what we needed. I still walk my driveway and glance at the gate, not because I fear a semi will appear again, but because boundaries can be both protection and prison. A chain can keep you in and keep you safe. It all depends on who holds the key. If I learned anything from that mess, it's that patience and paperwork, two things nobody thinks sound heroic, are effective in their own way. You don't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes you need to document, to photograph, to copy and hand things to people whose job it is to translate evidence into action. Justice, in our case, arrived like a work crew, slow, steady, and a bit dusty. So here's what I'll leave you with, because if you're listening, you probably have an opinion already, and that's exactly what I want. Tell me what you think. Was I right to lock the gate and wait, or reckless for letting a truck sit there as long as I did? Was Marla a villain, or simply someone who lost sight of who she served? When a community has rules, where does accountability live, beyond the paper, or in the people who wield it? Drop a comment below with your take. Argue if you want. Tell me about something similar that happened where you live. Share this with someone who loves a good neighborhood drama. And if you want to see more stories where small-town theatrics meet real consequences, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one.